Republican Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison of Texas. Senator, thank you so much for appearing on Fox Business. Bipartisanship, can there be a compromise between your party, the Republicans, and the Democrats on financial reform?
Yes, we certainly hope so. And I think the Democrats are into theatrics right now. These votes and talking about Wall Street. It's the community banks that are left in the dust in this bill. And that's what we are trying to address. So we're trying very hard to have a bipartisan solution, enough that we can go to the floor and know that we will have input into this bill, unlike the health care reform that passed earlier this year.
Well, Senator, I know that you've been very vocal in your support and calling attention to community banks in this country, in particular in the home state, your home state of Texas. But at the same time, the too big to fail notion, if we do have this $50 billion slush fund to help out these ailing institutions, it seems that's the one part at this point that seems to have a little bit of agreement between the Democrats and Republicans, possibly between Senator Dodd and Senator Shelby. Can you respond?
Yes, but also it is that the Fed would only have supervisory authority over the top, 50 billion bank holding companies and above. That's what leaves the community banks and other banks in the system without the same voice and access. And it gives the impression that the 50 billion and above are too big to fail and everything else is sort of left over. That's wrong, and that's what we need to change.
Senator, it's Greg Jarrett. Americans seem to be rejecting your argument that the president and Congress are overreaching with this bill. And in fact, as you know, 2/3 of Americans, according to the Washington Post poll, want greater federal regulation of banks and financial institutions in Wall Street. Are you worried that if you continue to block this federal regulation, it's going to alienate voters?
Well, if we just vote by polls, then I think that's wrong. I think we've got to do what's right. This is not a Wall Street bill. This is a Main Street bill that needs to cover throughout the financial industry. The problem was not Main Street banks. We need to make sure that we don't over-regulate the Main Street banks so they can't loan to small business. That's the issue here. And we certainly don't want to give an advantage to the big banks over the small banks by saying that the big ones are too big to fail, so you can do whatever you want, risk as much as you want, earn as much as you want against the little banks that don't have that option. That's what we're trying to correct so that the bill will be even-handed. We want more regulation. We want reform. We want to get to that derivatives market so that we don't have what caused this meltdown. This bill before us doesn't do it, and that's why we are trying to have the Republican input, because we learned from the health care bill that if we don't try to stop a bill, we don't have any influence. Not one Republican amendment passed in the health care bill, not one, and not one Republican vote. We don't want that again in our economy and in this financial reform.
Well, Senator Hutchison, our correspondent from Washington, Rich Edson, is still with me. And Rich, I do want to ask you if we are starting to see other Republicans, obviously not Senator Hutchison, but other Republicans that might be willing to kind of come to the middle ground now and begin to negotiate with the Democratic counterparts.
I think as long as you continue to hear Senator Richard Shelby, he's the top Republican on the Senate Banking Committee, and he's the one who's negotiating with Senator Chris Dodd, the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee. If you begin to start to hear that there's no more progress that the two negotiators are making, then at that time Republicans will have to make the call as to whether they want to sign on to a bill that's mostly sponsored by Democrats or whether they just want to continue to oppose it. And I think right now, while that's going on, while Senator Shelby and Senator Dodd are still talking, still negotiating, Republicans are standing by to waiting to see what they can get out of that process in the hopes that perhaps there could be a bill that the majority of Republicans and Democrats will sign on to.
You know, Senator Hutchison, I do want to ask you about yesterday as we talk about financial reform in Congress. Yesterday, of course, all the executives from Goldman Sachs were in the basically kind of in the hot seat, if you will, being attacked by the senators, and even the New York Post said that the senators were a little foul-mouthed with them. Can you just give me a quick response and your reaction to yesterday's hearings with the Goldman Sachs executives?
Well, certainly no one condones kind of playing both sides, but I think the SEC is handling this. It shows that the law is in place that would handle this kind of issue, and we want to make sure that people know enough facts. I mean, it's transparency. It's for for a Goldman Sachs person to say one thing to one person and then something different to a different client is not right. We all know that. So let's direct at that what kind of regulation we need for transparency and make sure that we keep the balance in the system on derivatives.
Senator Hutchison, I've got some breaking news I have to get to, but I have to ask you real quick. You put up a heck of a fight in Texas running for governor. Any chance that you would consider running again to be governor of Texas?
Oh, I'm not thinking about anything beyond this year, and I've said I'm going to serve out my term, and I'm really working hard, getting back in gear, and I'm really enjoying being back and trying to stop some of the bad stuff that's going through here.
All right, well, very well said, and we'll keep asking the questions. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison from Texas, thank you so much for appearing on Fox Business. Rich Edson, of course, our correspondent.